Bishop, I thought maybe to start off, we could talk a little bit about the state of American education today. Ever since I was a kid, I've been hearing about the crisis of American education, so we're now 40 years into that. But, a lot of new waves have maybe shifted that a little bit. I'd love to hear your perspective on sort of the State of the Union address of like where are we right now as an educational body or entity within the United States?
Well, it's a very good question, and we could spend the whole time talking about the crisis of education. And, it's been going on for more than 40 years. It actually goes back to, I think it goes back to really kind of big shift from, the way education was delivered, let's say, for hundreds of years in the great liberal arts tradition. And in the last 100 years, education, I think, has become very, at least in the Western world, and at least in the United States, maybe not so much in Europe, but a very highly pragmatic and utilitarian approach to education. That basically schools were to train young people for the workforce. And that's not, maybe I'm overstating that, but, basically very career-oriented education. I mean, we live in a democracy, a capitalistic democracy, and so we're kind of trained to be productive, right? And so, in order to have a productive society, people have to be trained in different areas, and then bring those skills to the general marketplace and to have a career. And so, that's, I think, that's been sort of the philosophy of education over the last, let's say, 100 years. And with this sort of highly pragmatic, John Dewey, John Stuart Mill, some of the great leaders of utilitarianism. With that, I think what happened in education is it became sort of disintegrated as opposed to integrated, so that we were basically dividing up all the subjects and topics to their own special areas and losing kind of a sense of the whole. How do these things connect? What does it mean to be an educated person? You can be really specialized in one area, a tremendous mathematician, which is great, or a physicist, or a linguist, but to look at the educated person as someone who has a broad understanding of the whole of education, or the whole of learning, and how these different subjects all fit together to form someone who is truly kind of steeped in the kind of, I should say, classical understanding of the educated person. What Newman, let's say John Henry Newman, back in the middle of the 19th century, and the Oxford movement was all about, and that is the formation of someone and intellectually, but not just intellectually, but also the heart, to form the virtuous person. A specialization, that can come along as well. But I think the crisis really has been this kind of disintegration and sort of fragmentation of education, so that we're all sort of in our own lanes and our own silos, and becoming experts in particular fields, which is, we need experts in fields. But sure. I see this happening also to medicine. There's so much specialization in the area of medicine and healthcare. To have somebody who's just sort of a general practice doc. There are fewer and fewer, yeah. And I think we all should be certain general practice docs. We all should have a broad understanding of everything. But that's been lost, I think. That should be the basis and foundation of all education. And then, maybe go into specialty areas. But it seems like we start to specialize from, kindergarten.
Yes. Do you think, so I'm with Mortimer Adler, that even our farmers should be reading Aristotle, right? Yeah. But I wonder if that was a shift in the understanding of human nature that occurred maybe 100 years ago, or if it was more of a sociological concern of what's really best for society. And if you're a utilitarian, it's going to be good workers who can produce things that make money, versus an understanding of human nature and what's good for the human person. Do you think that was part of the shift that happened in those philosophers or in that movement of John Dewey and the like?
Well, I think a lot of it was driven by, sort of the capitalistic, idea of consumerism and production, and the Industrial Revolution and workers and careers and those kinds of things. And the idea, too, that the good life equates with wealth, and that money really is the main pursuit, and someone who is able to have a career where they can earn a lot of money. That's sort of the recipe for the good life or the happy life. Well, we know that's not true, because we know a lot of millionaires that are terribly unhappy and miserable. So I think that's part of it. That's part of what's led to it, is this sort of understanding that, well, if I can just make a lot of money, I'll be happy, and therefore I got to get the best job that will make me that money. And then other things too, I think, kind of a losing our way, and this is more philosophical, losing our way as far as what really brings about purpose and meaning in life. What is the good life? What does make someone happy? What is the recipe for happiness? And I think that has to do with virtue. Living a virtuous life, learning how to grow in virtue, magnanimity. To be magnanimous and not turned on yourself, but turned towards others, because we know that that's really the best version of ourselves, are those who go out of themselves to help others and have this sort of desire to bring joy and hope to others around you, not just being self-centered. And I think part of the education we receive does sort of tend to kind of default to self-centeredness and that competition to make as much money as we can, and we lose the sense of the whole, of what it is that education should be forming us toward.
So I'd love to hear your answer then to naysayers that think, well, then why should we read things that are 3,000 years old? Why what does Homer have to do with that?
Yeah. Well, I think we have to recognize that wisdom, and really that's what we're talking about, is you can have a lot of knowledge and we can be very academically have a lot of information in our brains, but that's data that's really there to make us wise, and wisdom is partly a gift from God, but also the wise man or the wise woman has this broad understanding of reality, of the world and of relationships and of human emotions and of virtue and all these things. And so the great thinkers of our whole tradition, going back to Homer, have written about what it is that makes us virtuous. What is goodness, truth, and beauty, and how is that manifested in the lives of these great figures? And that's why, a character like Odysseus, in his journey, from the Trojan Wars back to his home in Ithaca, and everything that happens, it's like a little microcosm of life, and how he's a coward sometimes, and how he's selfish sometimes, but at other times he overcomes his selfishness, overcomes his cowardness and fear, and becomes heroic. And so just take that one example of the Odyssey. You have all the virtues and all the vices, of life. And those kinds of things never change. That's 3,000 years old, but things haven't changed too much since then. And then everything since then, whether it be the rest of the Greek thinkers, or into Roman or Western civilization, the plays of Shakespeare, there's probably no better author who understood human nature than William Shakespeare. And he portrays it in an artistic way through plays and through poetry, but really plays are poetry, which really paints a picture in the imagination of truth, goodness, and beauty as it's as it's played out, as it's played out and acted in these wonderful plays that have stood the test of time. And then, even in that's primarily fiction, although he had historical plays as well, but great literature and art and poetry also appeal to the imagination and are able to lead people to higher things. Because most of the great books and the great works of literature and art and music lift us up to greater things. They really do kind of elevate the human soul. And that's why I think those are perennial. And are there modern authors that are doing the same thing? Yeah, I think there are. But we'll know if they last, if people are reading them in 100 years from now. But we know that people have been reading these authors for hundreds and hundreds of years, and they continue to have relevancy even today, even though they're in the past.
Hey everybody, I hope you enjoyed this part of the conversation. You can watch the rest of the episode a week before anyone else if you head over to media.benedictine.edu. God bless.